Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for new stories from Yellowcat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet, and let's get started. What's the silliest mistake you've seen a bad coworker make? Part 3. Oh my god, yes. It may be difficult to explain, but a colleague made a major mistake that required tens of thousands of dollars and a month to fix. A ferry boat. I used to be a ferry boat captain. It was attached to cables both above and below the surface thanks to its 6 cable-driven cars. Electric power was provided by an enormously thick 5-inch diameter electric cable, which was attached to a cable situated approximately 30 feet above the boat and was referred to as the baloney for some reason. With a little instruction, operating the boat was simple. There was very little to do. With 2 motors, you have to push the levers in opposite directions to keep them there until you're about 3/4 of the way across the river. Then you can feather them back to land gently but firmly. The cables would not move very far even if you spun the boat, keeping it from breaking off and floating downstream. Apart from adjusting the angle of the boat with respect to the banks through the use of the up and downstream motors, a controller was also included to modify the angles at which the boat was attached to the cable above it. I never really fiddled with it, since once you adjusted the boat according to river height and water flow, it wasn't really necessary. We were on our own, working 12.5-hour shifts in the middle of nowhere from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I'm not sure if my coworker was simply foolish or intoxicated. For some reason, she simultaneously turned the boat with the motors and angled it with the controller. The baloney, which normally had so much slack that it would swing down into the river, literally ripped apart as a result of her extreme spinning of the boat. Consider the force required to rip an extension cord in half, then increase the cord's thickness by 5 inches. She lost all power as soon as she did that. Everything from motors to lights. Not even a generator, as far as I can tell, to call the radio into the office. The tiny dinghy rescue boat that was affixed to the side of the ferry was the only source of power for the 30-ton boat. I've done this before, so I know how tiresome it can be to drag the ferry with a small outboard motor, nearly an hour. And that's with ideal circumstances, a summer river flowing slowly and shallowly. This was carried out by a coworker in the late winter when the river was roaring and the snow melt was beginning. The force of the water was increased because she had angled the boat so much that she was practically working at a 45-degree angle upriver. Tens of thousands of dollars were spent on the severely stretched steel cables, fried outboard motor, broken baloney, and damage to the boat from hitting rocks after everything was said and done. Indeed, she was laid off. Additionally, there was the occasion when the 2 bosses needed to use the dinghy, but instead of letting it go, they succeeded in setting it loose when attempting to enter. A few days later, they found the boat quite a distance downstream, even though one of them had jumped into the water to try to save it. This was at my previous job. I worked in a market/deli where we carried imported wines that were not available in your typical liquor store. We had a promotion where you could get 10% off if you purchased a 12 case of all imported wines. This guy, however, was a complete cheapskate when he came in to buy wine, demanding a lower price because the discount was insufficient. While assisting them, the owner's niece gathered the wine and printed a receipt that he could scan at the register to make his payment. The problem is that despite only ringing up 6 bottles on the receipt, she failed to properly inform anyone that the receipt needed to be scanned twice. Nee starts helping another customer with a custom order, and instead of telling the customer, "I'll be with you in a moment, I need to take care of this transaction," she passed the transaction on to me to do instead, keeping in mind she didn't tell me that they were buying 12 bottles, not 6. Naturally, the client remained silent because, to begin with, he was being incredibly cheap regarding the wine. I allowed the man to leave our store with 6 complimentary bottles of wine, even though nobody informed me that he had 12 in the box he was carrying. The 6 bottles had a minimum value of $60 to $70. Scan the receipt and it will all appear, is what I was just told. Once we realized the mistake after the guy left, I instantly started to freak out because I'm convinced I'll be fired for the niece not communicating properly to me and me being the one who cashed them out. Since the niece is family and I'm not, I knew that her job would not be in danger. I told her as much, and I also snapped at her. Because I was so enraged, I was also pretty nasty about it. Additionally, this was the second time she had jeopardized my job due to her errors. It really enraged me that she didn't want to accept full responsibility for what had happened. When the owners arrived to handle the matter, there wasn't really anything we could do. We all got into serious trouble, but I refused to back down from my position that none of this would have occurred if my niece had handled the transaction herself, as she should have done from the beginning, or had actually used her words correctly. None of it. Yes, I do have a story for this. Being a former railroad employee, I was not present when this occurred because it was an off day. Nevertheless, I know enough about the tale to be able to recount it. Trains are built in a switching operation. Cars are added or removed from blocks of cars, and moved to different tracks. 2 methods are used to accomplish this. Pulling, in which the train actually pulls the cars behind it, and pushing, in which the train is behind every car and pushes it into the track. A pair of eyes must always be focused on the direction the train is going. The train's engineer can see the track ahead and is in charge of making sure nothing or no one is stuck when the train's pulling. In the event of a shove, the conductor, who's either on the ground where the train's going or seated in the car farthest from the engine, will direct the train downward by informing the engineer of what lies ahead, advising them on how far to stop safely, and ensuring the train operates safely. Apart from 2 very specific instances, almost invariably there is someone protecting the shove. 1. The conductor is pushing a few cars along the track and has a good enough view to determine that there's sufficient room and that there's no people or obstacles in the way. Although it's not recommended, it's acceptable if you can see the train's bottom. 2. Before forcing cars onto the track, the conductor has made sure it is empty or that there's enough room for a safe stopping distance between any obstacles, usually accomplished by having pulled cars from the adjacent track. A blind shove, in which there's no conductor on the train or at the designated stopping place for the cars furthest from the engine, is prohibited. This is the point of major mishaps. One evening, the conductor received instructions to relocate a portion of the cars from one track to another, and he was told there would be ample room for them to do so. He ordered the train to begin pushing a 4,500-foot train while he stood at the head of the track, making sure no one was watching the lowermost cars to prevent them from hitting anyone. There was already a 250-foot multi-car on the track, and nobody was tracking. The train struck the already parked cars at 10 miles per hour, forcing them through their brakes, slammed into a switch leading to a different track, and ran into another crew working at the bottom of the yard. Even so, there's a lot of force, and the conductor didn't realize it was happening until the engineer on the hit train changed to their frequency and told them about the mess he had made. There were no injuries since the cars buckled up when they were pressed up against the opposing engine, and the other crew conductor went inside. What kind of negative experience have you had with a homeowners association or bad neighbors? Part 3. I don't know if this can be called a negative experience, but nevertheless, in 2020, I moved into my condo. At the time, the president, vice chair, and treasurer were the 3 key positions on the board, each held by a single individual. They were making some serious ball drops. 2 neighbors who ran for board seats in the summer of 2021 were elected in that year. According to our CC&Rs, the board needs a president, vice chair, and treasurer. Other neighbors can serve as regular board members or as chairpersons of other committees. With enough votes, the 2 new electors were able to assume the offices of vice president and president. About New Year's, the former president and vice president resigned right away, declining an offer to continue as regular members. The two new elects took office as president and vice president in 2022. The treasurer continued to sit. The fact that this neighborhood is 35 years old and has a well-established culture of detesting the HOA and wringing as much money as they can out of the dues we must pay, which are approximately $500 per month in California, provides important context to this situation. More than 200 units are present. In the summer of 2022, voter registration opens. No one adds their own names. Holidays in 2022 with just the president, vice president, and treasurer on the ballot. An HOA is required by state law for condo complexes. Our CC&Rs state that no one holding one of the three critical roles may leave their position unless a replacement is found. Thus, the election is essentially a sham. The current board members must remain in their roles. Election registration opens in the summer of 2023. No one adds their own names. The ballot for holidays in 2023 is the same as it was in 2017. No fresh monikers. Once more, the current board members must retain their posts. Now that summer 2024 has arrived, the sign-ups for the election has just been received. There's a second letter included for the first time in my 4 years, and apparently the first time ever according to my neighbors. They seem to be pleading with people to join, and it's clear from the language why. These people have been working like dogs for no apparent reason, rather than taking pleasure in their homes, families, and retirement. The only way the CC&R members can go against the board are through selling their house, losing an election, being hospitalized for serious illness, or passing away. To carry out the actions of the previous board in 2021, they require assistance or seek new electors. They're likely to face a third year of this unappreciated, demanding job where they're surrounded by people who don't want to work in the system and want everything they're legally entitled to. Thus, give it careful thought before running for your board. You might be this person. Every HOA in the businesses that take their money are filthy. Some years ago, I bought my first house. Hooray! Though it was in a homeowners association, I didn't mind at all for a townhouse and the amount of things the fee covered. Came with a pool, I didn't have to mow my own lawn, the house insurance was paid for, and snow and ice were not a problem. Problems arose during the first year. It turns out that snow and ice removal is only done in certain situations. So, even though our ice storms were severe, the residents are responsible for clearing the snow and ice. That year, the pool I had been eager to use was undergoing extensive maintenance, and I was either out of town or preoccupied during its open hours, so there was no pool for me. Things started to get interesting in year 2. My board worked frantically to get everyone covered after my state's insurance company withdrew, but we were not eligible for the favorable rate because of a claim from years ago. Thus, they obtained a payday loan, exhausted their bank accounts, and subsequently transferred the debt to the homeowners for handling. Within a month, my $175 monthly fee increased to $450. The lawn care was also not very good. There were several older trees in my neighborhood, and after storms, big branches fell and were not removed for several weeks. This made it difficult for me to take my dogs for walks in the grass. In the third year, my dues have increased to $500 per month, and it appears that we'll be informed tomorrow that we must replace our electrical boxes and tear out our fireplaces, with the expense borne by the owner naturally. Furthermore, another rate increase is anticipated in December. Given that most of the people in my community are retirees on fixed incomes, I've noticed a significant number of townhouses going up for sale since the dues increased. To sell mine as well, I've already gotten in touch with a realtor. I hate homeowners associations. An essential background information. Although it's technically a voluntary HOA, I am personally the only person who did not choose to participate in it. As a purchase condition, anyone else who was interested opted in. The contractual obligation to join was circumvented by me in order to acquire my home through means that were not as typical. The fact that I've been able to maintain my existence as a holdout despite being surrounded by the HOA has not been without its share of stories. They forged my signature on a copy of the HOA contract, which they considered to be dishonest. They have begun with the monetary penalties. The color of the house, the dumpster, the RV, the fence, and so on. Currently, my attorney is pursuing legal action against them, and he's already obtained a temporary court order to prevent the HOA from levying any and all liens. Even though they had not yet submitted a lien, there is already a temporary court order that prevents them from doing so until the conclusion of the civil and criminal actions that have been brought against the HOA board and the HOA itself. Additionally, a detective from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, is conducting an investigation into the forgery. Over $10,000 worth of legal fees have already been incurred as a result of this. Must confess that I adore my attorney. A "we'll sue them for the legal costs later" mentality is guiding everything that he's doing. It's been reported by my attorney that they're digging their hole all the way to China. Through the use of the HOA holiday event, OH and another individual informed the entire HOA that this legal action is currently being pursued as a result of the alleged criminal activities of certain board members. It's almost as if the letter was written by a lawyer or something like that. The lawsuit that was filed against me for slander and libel, both, was dismissed by my attorney because they were unable to prove that I had written it, which I did not, and it merely informed the HOA members that legal action was being taken against them. Furthermore, there was no gag order in place, and the word allegedly was used rather than a direct accusation. Immediately following the conclusion of mine, there is going to be a second lawsuit filed against the board members for gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and other similar offenses, according to rumors. That was the only thing I wanted to do: fix up my new house and live a quiet life. If you want to watch the part 2, click the link here. Very, very glad to see you all in the comments again. Many, many thanks for your support.